is an epic written by Sri Aurobindo. It is perhaps the longest epic in English language, running into 23,000 lines. It has taken over 50 years for him to write it. He was a born poet, but still he felt the need to revise and re-revise it as he ascended different levels of consciousness. He pulled up the epic, the narrative, the ideas to the new levels attained. And some of the portions which he touched last were done 2 months before he left his physical body. It is an old legend taken from the scriptures, but given a new symbolic interpretation. The story, as it runs in the traditional scriptures of India, is that Savitri is born to a king who didn't have any issue. Not having an issue, he goes to the forest, does penance for 18 years, adoring and worshipping the Divine Mother. The Divine Mother is pleased with his austerities and gives him a boon that she herself would take birth as his daughter. When the daughter is born, she grows up with a certain afflatus of spiritual glory, so much so that no human being comes forward to claim her hand. She is sent out, the princess, to choose her own suitor, and she comes across an exiled prince called Satyavan and marries him. Before she is married, the heavenly sage Narada warns her that that man would die after 12 months. Still she marries him, undergoes her own austerities, and when he dies, when the king of death appears to claim his soul, she follows him beyond the earth by virtue of her austerities, pleases the god, and wins back her husband. Now this legend is cited as an example of the virtue of conjugal fidelity. But Sri Aurobindo has taken this very legend and worked upon it to express the original intention of the seer, to record the conquest of death for man by divine grace taking a human form. Savitri is the grace itself taking a human form in order to win conquest over death and win immortality for man. That's the general story. turns into 12 books, the number of cantos. In the midst of this epic, when she has married the prince, as the hour of death approaches, in the forest where she is living with the blind parents of the prince, old, exiled monarchs, grief gathers in her heart. But she is very careful not to speak of the impending doom to anybody, not even to her husband who is due to die. She keeps it for that knowledge for herself. And she is extremely depressed. As she is sitting there like an ordinary woman, overcome with grief, she hears a voice from the heights of her being. Is it for this to nurse grief in thy heart that thou wert born? She replies, what shall I do? The strength has been taken away from me. I cannot even pray to God because God is indifferent. Then the voice says, is this what I have to report to the Creator, that his servant returns with his task undone? That stings her. And she says, what shall I do? I have no strength. What shall I do to recover my strength? She hears the voice, find thy soul. And immediately, as she is sitting, she plunges into herself. She goes into her being, leaves the physical frontiers and enters into the inner countries of the soul. The moment she steps out of the border, earth region, there is a hissing serpent. Back to earth, O creature of earth, lest thou die. But she doesn't care. Holding her soul in her hands, she walks through the black regions, hostile territories, where everyone looks but nobody answers, where everyone is seen but nobody can be felt. All the regions of the human being, subconscious, unconscious, inconscient, are described in vivid terms. And she goes, traverses the territories of the inconscient, the subconscious, the vital regions, the mental regions. And when she comes to the country of the mind, there are very wise people asking her, you are welcome here. We have solved the problem. We have solved the cosmic question in a system. We have systematized everything, and they ask her to sit along with her. But she says, I'm not satisfied. I have to go to find my soul. Then these mental beings, those who have exhausted the possibility of the mind, they turn to each other and say, are there still beings, still people who believe there is a soul? They don't know that the soul is only a secretion of a gland. And they shake their heads. She passes on. As she passes on, she sees a brilliant company, gods and goddesses with tiaras, with sages and saints and kings and princes, all in beautiful attire, brilliant company coming. She knows that they have come from where she is to go. They are on their way to serve humanity, carrying help to humanity. For a moment she is tempted to join them. But then she realizes, what help am I going to give to humanity, myself not having the strength? And so she tells them, which is the way? Who are you? They say, Savitri, we are coming from thy soul, from the kingdom of thy soul. And what's the way to the soul? They said, follow the winding highway of the world, this way, and through the rocks and caves, you will come to a place where there is the central fire. Cross that fire and you will meet thy soul. So it is a long narrative. Savitri follows the directions, meets the mother of grief. She goes on a plateau. After she comes out of a hard cave, narrow cave, there is the mother of, there she sees sitting on a boulder an old woman with ancient grief lined on her face, with her feet on sharp wounding stones. And she looks at her. She says, I am the mother of sorrows. Because I am, man can bear his suffering. Before he suffers, first I suffer. That is the mother of grief, the mother of sorrows, who bears all the pain and suffering. She goes ahead. She says, I can only endure, but God has not given me the power to save. She goes ahead and sees a brilliant woman sitting with a spear and a trident in her hand, with a lion at the back, at the foot. And she has victory in her eyes. She is the mother of might, who puts down evil, builds the strength. And she says, I have been able to help, but I have not been able to save, because God has not given me that power. Third, she meets the mother of light, who gives knowledge, who builds, but she complains that all the knowledge that she brings, man appropriates to his mind, that it is his mental knowledge, forgetting the real source of knowledge. And Savitri goes ahead and she says, all the three are insufficient. She goes to meet the mother of love, who will fulfill, who will give deliverance, love. And as she goes, she comes to a house of fire which has no walls. She passes through, and then as she comes out, she meets her own soul, the divine Savitri. And both the human Savitri and the divine Savitri merge into each other. Now this is a capital phenomenon. When in the course of spiritual journey, our self meets the overself, the soul meets the oversoul, and they merge into each other. So man recovers his unity with his divine counterpart, and thereafter it is the divine counterpart that does the yoga. At this stage, when she has realized unity with that, she feels one with great strength, with great power, and she wakes up on earth completely a changed woman. And at that time, she invokes the mother of the worlds, the divine mother, to take her stand in herself, offers her heart for her to live, and in answer to her intense prayer, there is a descent. The divine presence descends, and the moment she descends, what happens? This is described. That is relevant to the discussion in which we are engaged. So she is concentrating and calling. In its deep lotus home, her being sat as if on concentration's marble seat, calling the mighty mother of the worlds to make this earthly tenement her house. As in a flash from a supernal light, a living image of the original power, a face, a form came down into her heart and made of it its temple and pure abode. But when its feet had touched the quivering bloom, a mighty movement rocked the inner space, as if a world were shaken and found its soul. Out of the inconscious, soulless, mindless night, a flaming serpent rose, released from sleep. As a result of that impact, the Kundalini, that flaming serpent, rises. It rose, billowing its coils, and stood erect, and climbing mightily, stormily on its way, it touched her centers with its flaming mouth, as if a fiery kiss had broken their sleep. They bloomed and laughed, surcharged with light and bliss. It is rising with such speed and violence that one doesn't have to draw it up. It storms its way, and all the lotuses wake up. They bloomed and laughed, surcharged with light and bliss. Then at the crown it joined the eternal space. In the flower of the head, in the flower of matter's base, in each divine stronghold and nature not, it held together the mystic stream which joins the viewless summits with the unseen depths. The arisen power has joined the mystic heights with the unseen depths, and as a result all underwent a high celestial change, breaking the black inconscience blind mute wall, effacing the circles of the ignorance. Powers and divinities burst flaming forth, each part of the being trembling with delight lay overwhelmed with tides of happiness and saw her hand in every circumstance and felt her touch in every limb and cell. In the country of the lotus of the head, that is the 1,000-petal lotus, the highest lotus, what happens? Which thinking mind has made its busy space. The thinking mind has its base in the 1,000-petal lotus. In the castle of the lotus twixt the brows, whence it shoots the arrows of its sight and will. The eyebrow center is a center of sight and will. In the passage of the lotus of the throat, where speech must rise and expressing mind. It is the center of expression, and the heart's impulse run towards word and fact, a glad uplift, and a new working came. He speaks of the three centers. The center at the summit, the center of the thinking mind, the center of vision and will, the center of expression. There he says, the immortal's thoughts displaced our bounded view. The immortal's thoughts, earth's drab idea and sense. All things now bore a deeper, heavenlier sense. A glad, clear harmony marked the truth's outline, reset the balance and measures of the world. Our normal measures and balance of life, they are recast once this change comes over. Each shape showed its occult design, unveiled God's meaning in it, for which it was made. And the vivid splendor of his artist thought, a channel of the mighty mother's choice. The immortal's will took into its calm control the willpower here, our blind or erring government of life. The whole life is brought under a divine control. Life now obeyed to a diviner rule, and every act became an act of God. In the kingdom of the lotus of the heart, love, chanting its pure hymeneal hymn, made life and body mirrors of sacred joy, and all the emotions gave themselves to God. In the navel lotus's broad imperial range, its proud ambitions and master lusts were tamed into instruments of a great calm sway to do a work of God on earthly soil. In the narrow nether center's petty parts below the navel, its childish game of daily dwarf desires was changed into a sweet and boisterous play, a romp of little gods with life in time. In the deep place where once the serpent slept, there came a grip on matter's giant powers for large utilities in life's little space. A firm ground was made for heaven's descending might. Up to the last center, a change has been worked out. Behind all reigned her sovereign, deathless soul, casting aside its veil of ignorance, a light to gods and cosmic beings and powers. It built the harmony of the human state. Further on, when full of this power, when she encounters the god of death, who draws out the soul of her husband and takes it. She leaves her physical body and in her subtle body follows the god of death across the earth, across the other worlds, beyond the worlds of idea and ideal. And he tries to convince her that there is no God, there is no truth, all life has to end in death. Even the very gods have to find their repose in death. He tries to convince her and go back. She refuses. It is a long debate between death and the human aspiration as embodied in Savitri. And at last he says, if you have the power of the world mother, show it to me so that I too may worship. And Savitri looked on death and answered not. A mighty transformation came on her, a halo of the indwelling deity, the immortal's luster that had lit her face, made the air a luminous sea. In a flaming moment of apocalypse, the incarnation thrust aside its veil. There is a descent of the Divine Mother consciousness in her, and there again he describes what happens. He says, the power that from her being's summit reigned, the presence chambered in lotus secrecy, came down and held the center in her brow, where the mind's lord in his controlled room sits. There, throned on concentration's native seat, he opens that third mysterious eye in man, the unseen eye that looks at the unseen. When light with a golden ecstasy fills his brain, and the eternal's wisdom drives his choice, and eternal will seizes the mortal will. That is, in this center, the eternal will replaces the mortal will. The unseen eye that looks at the unseen, it replaces the bounded human sight. It stirred in the lotus of a throat of song, lotus of expression, and in her speech throbbed the immortal word. Such a person, what he speaks is a word of power. Her life sounded with the steps of the world soul, moving in harmony with the cosmic thought. As glides God's Son into the mystic cave, where hides his light from the pursuing gods, it glided into the lotus of her heart and woke in it the force that alters fate. It poured into the navel's lotus depth, lodged in the little life nature's narrow home. On the body's longings grew heaven rapture's flower, and made desire a pure celestial flame. Desire itself becomes transformed into a pure celestial flame, broke into the cave where coiled world energy sleeps. This is the place where the energy is sleeping. And smote the 1,000-hooded serpent force that blazing towered and clasped the world self above, joined matter's dumbness to the spirit's hush, and filled earth's acts with the spirit's silent power. Thus changed, she waited for the word to speak. These are classic descriptions of what takes place in the human being when the 7 centers wake up. Each center, as I explained, governs a particular area of our being. The lowest center, what is called the Mooladhara, governs the physical health, physical prowess, physical power, sex. The next is the Swadhisthana. It governs the low, small desires. The navel lotus, Manipura, governs large vital movements. The Anahata, the center of the unstruck sound, here in the heart, governs love, unity. Vishuddha, at the throat, governs expression. Ajna governs the will and sight. And Sahasrara, the 1,000-petal lotus, governs the thinking mind and connects the mind with the superconscient regions, opens so that man is kept open to the workings of the consciousness above the mind. When you see pictures or statues of Buddha, for instance, you will always find at the top an inverted lotus, 1,000-petaled. When he is awake, it will point upwards. But the significance is that his consciousness is centered there. But these classic conception is of the 7 centers. But there are other centers above, centers of the superconscient, which are not yet formed in man. So far, mind, spiritual mind, is the highest faculty that has evolved in mankind. So that center is the highest. But as we take a leap, as we go beyond, the new faculty fixes itself, the faculty of truth consciousness, the faculty of the supermind or the gnosis, another center will fix itself in our subtle body. Similarly, below this Mooladhara also, there are centers, lotuses, chakras, of the subconscient, the inconscient. This center, the chakra of the inconscient, is below the feet, below the physical feet. And that of the subconscious somewhere about the knee. But these are not taken into account in the tantric yoga, because to tap those centers, it doesn't come in the purview of the tantric. He has the cosmos, the waking cosmos in his perspective, and to become an instrument of the divine enjoyer. It is enough for him to concern himself with these 7 normal centers. It is not that the Tantras practice only this yoga. Kundalini is one of the yogas, but there are, as I said, there are other yogas, the mantra yoga, the yoga of the sound, the yoga of external worship, where they take the mandalas or the yantras or the figures, significant figures, visualize the manifesting deity line by line, and then enter into communion. You will be interested to know that one of the fundamentals of the Tantras is to worship a god, you must first become a god. That is, when you sit for worship, by conception, by imagination, you identify yourself with God. Each limb, it is offered, consecrated, and offered to God, and one feels a sense of being possessed, occupied rather, not possessed, occupied by the deity that one worships. Limb by limb, when one is thus occupied, the consciousness itself changes. And when one completes the ceremony, completes the ritual, the sacred water with which one does this worship acquires great potency. And I have seen how when that water is sprinkled over people who are possessed by spirits, the spirit leaves them. It can't stand. So much spiritual vibrations are there in that water. Or in flowers, petals that are used. They imbibe those vibrations and to drive away possessions, malignant moods, chronic illnesses and whatnot. Keep adversity at bay. It is a special feature of the Tantras that, contrary to other traditions, they don't consider praying to God for one's material advancement, for little help, as something unspiritual. Orthodox tradition frowns upon praying to the divine for satisfaction of desires, for material advancement. But here, they say it is legitimate to pray and to draw upon the divine help to improve one's status, to improve one's conditions. Because, after all, man is a child of God. And Sri Aurobindo writes in one of his monumental books, The Synthesis of Yoga, that the mother soul desires that the child soul should come to her so that she can pour on him the bounty of her riches which she holds ready. She reaches her child through 1,000 hands. The division between worldly life and spiritual life, between secular life and religious life, is not admissible in this approach which looks upon the whole life as one. It is our way of looking at things, seeing things, that loves to make compartments in life. To reject life in order to gain the spirit is an easy way. But to accept life, meet its challenges, and convert it into a play of God is the boldest challenge that man is moved to meet. In his Life Divine, magnum opus, Sri Aurobindo writes that the animal is content with its modicum of necessities. The gods are content with their splendors. It is only given to man to be always dissatisfied, to be always wanting to push beyond his limitations. He is the greatest of the living beings because he is the most dissatisfied. The seeds of progress, the estrus of progress is there in man. And all these yogas, which are cast in a holistic mold, they aim to reclaim the earth to God, reclaim nature to God. In the scheme that I have referred in the morning, an integral perspective, all life is yoga. There is nothing too small, nothing too big for a seeker of God. In each moment, in each happening, he has to discover a divine meaning. Why? Nothing in this world happens by chance. Everything has a meaning and a purpose. When we don't understand it, when we fail to appreciate the significance, we say it is chance. There is a great plan in this creation. Within this plan, there is a large amount of freedom given to each one of us. Freedom given to determine at what pace we will progress, how long we will take to progress, in which direction. But the object, the goal is laid down, that man has to evolve into a divine being. Till man evolves into a divine being, becomes one and replaces his human consciousness by divine consciousness, there is no resting, there is no halting. Only those think of God, think of spiritual life, who have arrived at that point in evolution, which marks the turning point in his career. Willy-nilly, he has to tread the way. But spiritual wisdom concedes freedom to each individual to determine what path he will tread and how. Broadly, the divine manifests in the mind as knowledge, in the soul as love, in the life dynamism as power, in the physical body, in the physical as beauty. Life has to be built. Love and knowledge. It is a fourfold, simultaneous process, not a successive process, in which we take life as it is, introduce, increase the quantum of beauty, proportion, elegance, harmony at the physical level, free our energies, our will from slavery to desire and ego, rid the heart of the darker animal vestiges of the past, qualities and movements that constrict, that pull back, anger, hostility, violence, jealousy, cruelty. All these are ungodly qualities which man has to outgrow and cultivate what are the soul qualities of goodwill, benevolence, compassion, kindness, love. In the measure in which the negative qualities are eliminated and these positive ones are built, cultivated, organized in our life, the inner soul gets a chance to move forward and put its mastery of a soul consciousness on life. The texture of life, the character of life changes. And pure love gets an opportunity to establish itself. Selfishness, self-centeredness dies before this invasion of pure divine love, which asks for nothing, but which thrives only on self-giving. And thereafter, one recognizes that the intellect, limited intellectual knowledge, is a precarious knowledge. One silences the mind by methods of meditation, concentration, prayer, controls the mind, silences the mind, and keeps it open to the workings of higher faculties of consciousness, where knowledge forms spontaneously. You have an unerring knowledge. Knowledge is got not through labor of the intellect, but through illumination, inspiration, intuition. These are the various levels of consciousness with their corresponding powers that are waiting to be received in the human mind, fix themselves and make him capable of governing and leading a life with unerring knowledge, with a broad consciousness, awareness, eliminating the areas of pain, shadow, and suffering. Left to nature, this would take millenniums, but by an integral discipline of making all the parts of ourselves more and more conscious, scale the heights of consciousness, it is possible to precipitate the nature's movement in one lifetime or a few lifetimes. And in this concentrated yoga of nature, what is called the integral yoga. The tantras, the Vedanta, the psychology, all these fall in the right proportions, and the truth of each is claimed. Instead of ourselves working on each center of consciousness in a mechanical way, one keeps oneself open to the mighty cosmic Shakti, what we call the divine power, surrenders oneself, and that power descends in man and works upon those centers which are ready. It always starts from the top and not from the bottom. A very safe procedure, because it does not involve awakening of the unregenerate parts of the being when the person is not sufficient control. It starts with silence of the mind, purity of the heart, acts as a catharsis, so that in a purified being, the divine power, the divine consciousness establishes itself, and human nature slowly undergoes a change into a divine nature. Have any questions?
You talked about the levels of knowledge and mentioned illumination, inspiration, and intuition. I'm wondering, does that correspond with the chakras? So that illumination would be like at the heart level, inspiration at the yogic, intuition at
The question is, mention was made of higher powers of knowledge like illumination, inspiration, intuition, whether they have correspondence with the chakras which we described. No, because these chakras, 7 chakras, relate to levels of consciousness which are established in man, which are normally active in man. And these powers, intuition and others, go beyond the intellect. So their chakras have not yet been incorporated in the human consciousness. It is only when one goes beyond the thinking mind that one opens to the action of what is called the thought mind, the higher mind, where knowledge pours in masses without labored thinking. Above that is the illumined mind, where knowledge comes in illuminations. You see in light what you want to know. Still above is the level of intuition. Intuition is the edge of truth. If you want to know a particular thing, it flashes around. It flashes. And this intuition is there as truth audition, inspiration, truth sight, revelation, truth discrimination between the true and the false, true and the untrue. Above that is the overmind, the cosmic mind, where one gets an effortless knowledge of oneness, but oneness that does not cancel the variety, the multiplicity. These are all new states of consciousness which are yet to be organized in man. So their chakras have not yet been fixed.
Would you please discuss the nature of grace, the concept I don't understand?
The concept of grace, what does it mean? That's the question. There is a divine being, what we call God, overseeing this whole universal movement. The divine being is not separate, sitting like a judge with the scales of justice, weighing my good acts and the bad acts, rewarding me with paradise, condemning me to hell. That is an anthropomorphic conception, a very primitive conception, which is not true. The divine being, the Creator, God, He is identified with those whom He has emanated. But He has given a large freedom, infinite freedom to each one, to each soul who is a spark of his own being, to evolve, to progress. And there is a continuous, helpful regard from His compassionate eyes, which is called a divine compassion, which settles like dew from heaven, helping everyone to bear the consequences of his own movements, what we call karma. Now, a divine grace is something more. It is a deliberate will of deliverance coming from God, which helps man to cut across the net of karma. And this grace moves where it wills. There is no question of justice, right and wrong, where the grace is concerned. Grace is something beyond what is called rational or irrational. It just flows spontaneously from the being of God, reclaiming men, helping men to cross over. But this is only one side of the question. As I mentioned, I believe it was yesterday, grace flows where what is called a state of grace has been prepared. That state of grace takes a long time in preparing. When you see a sudden act of grace in this life, you can be sure that the state of grace has been built around that soul in a previous birth. It is like rain. Unless the soil is ready, the rain drops will fertilize nothing. If the soil is readied, then those raindrops help the seeds to sprout. So personal effort and the divine grace are two ends of the same process. Man works, man aspires because he is moved by grace. And grace descends because the conditions are ready. Grace is something other than the conception of justice. It is not justice that rules God's creation. It is love that rules. God does not punish. Man punishes himself. Grace helps him to see his error.
You have denied the anthropomorphic conception of God, but yet you've insisted on calling God He. Isn't that somewhat of a contradiction? And isn't that really more in the Western conceptualization of what divinity is? Or do you understand my question?
Yes. Do I repeat the question? On one hand, you deny the anthropomorphic conception of God, and on the other you speak of Him as He. Isn't this a contradiction? Isn't this more a Western view than the other view of reality? As I discussed at length during our discussion last evening, the divine reality is both with form and without form. It is without form, a state of existence, state of consciousness, state of bliss. But it is not bound to remain formless. It takes a form and lends itself to be experienced and communicated with when it chooses. And this form is not limited to any one form. The divine takes any number of forms, male or female in appearance. What I said, the anthropomorphic conception is the conception of a judge, punishing and rewarding, not one from whom wells out oceans of love. In the East, this conception of God as he or she is perhaps more widespread than in the West. Only we have also a simultaneous perception that the form is equally true as formlessness without form. Both are true. And to denote this fact, modern Eastern philosophers use the word divine and not God. God is a personal formulation of the reality, but the divine includes both the formed and the formless.
Would you, as a means of further clarification, differentiate how the Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism, Hinduism, Tantra, differentiate between the Judeo-Christian traditions of divinity and cosmology? It seems to me that there is a very real difference, but many Easterners, as it were, try to compensate or make as though there is no difference, when in fact there is. I don't know. What is your view on this?
I don't think...
Do you think that there is a difference between the Eastern perception of reality, the Eastern philosophical perception, and the typically Judeo-Christian view of reality?
Is there a real difference between the Christian conception of reality, the philosophical conception, and the Eastern? That is the question. There is an essential difference between the Christian theological position and the Eastern position, whether it is spiritual, religious, or theological. In India, no religion, no theology can stand unless it is based on spiritual experience. There are no dogmas as such in the Eastern life. Each is a verifiable truth which one can ascertain for oneself by adopting the means therefore. In the Christian theology, for instance, they speak of one incarnation. The reality manifests itself on earth in one form for all time, but the Eastern conception does not. The Eastern conception conceives of the reality taking human form and helping the evolution of humanity at periodical junctures in the evolutionary history. And each such incarnation is called an avatar. There have been many before and there will be many hereafter. It can't be limited to one. Second, in the Christian theology, there is only one birth. It is contrary to the philosophy or the truth of evolution. If you accept evolution, the orthodox Christian theology can't stand. That is what Teilhard Chardin had to say ultimately. Though he tried to harmonize the Christianity with the philosophy of evolution which he propounded, still that the biblical account that God created this world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and he is there as a creator, that cannot stand philosophical scrutiny. And if we accept evolution, all evolution can't be compressed in one life. It has to have reincarnation. Second, in the Christian position, man cannot become one with God. That is blasphemy, as I have understood it. But in the Eastern, whether it is Buddhist or Hindu or Sufi, the human consciousness is derived from divine consciousness, and it only recovers its unity, recovers its identity, and it is a natural end, natural goal to unite with the parent consciousness. Man can become one with the divine here on earth, maybe only in a particular center, particular area, but still it is possible for man to act, to feel divine, act divine, and be divine. But this is not accepted. It is ruled out in the Christian theology. So there are fundamental differences, and that is why in this country particularly, the Orthodox Christianity has had to make many modifications, accept new changes. If it has to survive, it has to change. And one of the recent popes, he saw this dichotomy and he pleaded for what is called an ecumenical approach, finding areas of dialogue with other religions, other philosophies, and meeting grounds. He initiated a very significant movement. There are still areas like reincarnation, soul incarnation, possibility of union with God. Well, these are areas so far irreconcilable, but with the progress of knowledge, with the healing of the gulf between the East and the West, and the world becoming one, I do think these characteristics or characteristic movements will have become things of the past. Yes.
You said that Shiva and Shakti, the differentiation was in the role that they play.
Yes.
Okay. on physical level, we all play roles too, even though our essence is still is the same. Is there a correlate between the role that Shiva and Shakti play and the roles that we play as men and women, husbands and wives, fathers?
No. No. The question is recorded. It is not. Because, as I explained, each individual being has both Shiva and Shakti in him. So each woman also has the Shiva in her, and each man has also the Shakti in her. It is self-deception to choose to want a woman as a Shakti or for the woman to want a man as a Shiva. It is better honestly to have relation as man and woman, and not in the guise of Shiva and Shakti. That's not the truth. Each person has both the elements. It is man-made civilization in which man has conveniently given a subordinate position to the woman, and he wants her to be his instrument. But that does not answer to truth. Whoever achieves that harmony of the active and the passive element, of the supportive and the dynamic element in himself or herself, she is the instrument of God. She is more evolved, he is more evolved.
Could you tell us a little bit about Orville, the ashram, and the kind of practices and things that you do there?
Our ashram in India is a spiritual community which has grown over 50 years, having for its aim the evolution of the individual into a divine being, and the formation of a society which harmonizes the relations between the individual and the collectivity. It is a problem yet to be solved, whether the individual is more important or the society, or the society is more important and the individual is only a cell. In our ashram, an attempt has been made to find a new equation between the individual and the society. That each individual is indispensable to the society, but each individual also draws from the society and has perforce to contribute his best to the society. It is one truth, an individual scheme and a collective scheme. It's one reality. Society and man are not two contradictory units, but complementary units. To learn to live together, practicing the ideal of human unity, people from different countries, different races, completely eliminating the concept of class, rich and poor, aristocratic and plebeian, white, brown and black, completely eliminating and living on a basis of perfect equality, equal opportunities, equal care. That is the basis of the collective life of our spiritual community. We have very few of rules and regulations. Each one is maintained, supported by the community, and each one contributes to the growth of the community. There is no private wealth, no economy based on competition, but only a voluntary association on the basis of harmony and love. Every aspect of life is looked upon as an opportunity to impress the diviner and the higher values attained in the one's inner pursuit. There is a constant relating between the inner and the outer. Life is taken as a whole. And the fourfold scheme of perfection which I just mentioned, beauty, power, love and knowledge, they are the ideals held before each one. We do not worship any god of any particular religion. We hold the divine to be the truth consciousness. And the rituals, ceremonies, worship, they are not part of our life. Our yoga is mainly psychological. Change of attitudes, new approaches, building of relations on a different basis, surpassing of the ego, eliminating of desire, and absolute surrender to the divine. So that with this opening to the higher consciousness, ascent of human consciousness and the descent of divine consciousness, a different equation is worked out, and man evolves his spiritual consciousness in a rapid manner. We have no family life in the ashram. Each individual looks upon the entire community as his family, should look upon the entire community as his family. All energies are directed towards this higher pursuit. There are facilities for mental development, for development of the finer aesthetic and the emotional side of man, music, arts, and similar humanities, through which the finer senses are cultivated on deeper lines. That's the difference between Western art and Indian art, Western music and Indian music, but that's another subject. We have also a center, international center of education, where recognizing that the old principles of education all over the world have got out of date, and educationists are searching for new foundations. We have been experimenting with certain spiritual principles to base the future development of the child. One of it is that in the future education will not be confined to the classroom. Education is lifelong, and the responsibility of parents is much more than the responsibility of teachers in a school. A child spends, after all, 4 to 5 hours a day in a school, but the remaining 20 hours or 18 hours is spent at home. And it is the example that the parents set, the model that the parents give him, that determines his character. So education can't be compartmentalized. The instruction received in the school is different, but the training of the personality, the background, the mold in which the child forms himself They are determined at home. So a community of interests, parents, the child and the teacher, the school teacher, have to be forged. So new avenues of educational research are being opened up. And this experiment, which has been confined so long to a select band of seekers, some 2,000 of us nearly, is now extended in what is called planetary city of Auroville, the city of dawn, 7 miles away from Pondicherry, where it is planned to receive about 50,000 people from all over the world, those who have realized the hollowness of the present way of life, who feel an urgent need to go beyond the present way of living, lifestyle, and to give them an opportunity to develop their own consciousness, to live together and cooperate in building a new pattern of society based on perfect equality, freedom and unity. That is Auroville. We have about 500 people from different parts of the world, out of which I believe about 100 are from America, equal or a little more from France, and the rest from other countries. They are all settled in 20 settlements, about some agricultural settlements, some orchards, some workshops, some agro-industries and so on. So far, about 2,000 acres of land have been acquired, and the process of settlement is on. Naturally, it is now 10 years since the experiment is going on. We have found our limitations, how far man is prepared to go in this direction and how far he resists. So it is an interesting experiment with cooperation, with conflict that goes on, conflict between the old and the new, old habits and the new requirements. Only all live there without owning private wealth, without a family system. Families are outmoded. The old family system is outmoded. The movement is towards a world family in which you have relations with others, you love others, you have affection for others, not because they are related to you by blood tie, but because they are co-citizens of the world. That is Auroville, still in the making. About 138 countries sent soil of their earth through representatives at the foundation ceremony of Auroville 10 or 11 years ago. And the various countries represented by their governments or other bodies are taking active interests. And the United Nations too is specially interested in knowing how we are going to solve this problem of human settlement. This group living is a challenge which has not yet been solved. And wherever such experiments are being made, the human mind is looking at it in order to find a prototype for the new age. And Auroville is one of these experiments. I think it is 5, we have to clear this hall. We are meeting at 7:30. I have said what I wanted to say on Kundalini during the last 3 talks. And in the 4th talk, I would be available to speak on any theme that you would give, or generally on the requirements of yoga. In whatever the yoga you do, there are certain fundamental requirements. Without fulfilling them, you can't expect success in yoga. If you agree we can take up that theme at 7:30 when we meet.